Well, thank you for coming. Thanks for being here, and it's good to finally meet in person. Ben, you and I have known each other for a while. It's good to reconnect. I'm assuming most people are familiar with AT&T to some extent, but maybe less familiar with Open Networking Lab or ON.LAB. So what I thought I might do is start off with Bill, just kind of introduce yourself, the initiatives at ON.LAB, and then we can swing things over to Ben to talk about it more from the telco perspective, your interests in open source. I'll ask questions, and with that, let's get started. So, Bill, please.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. So, Open Networking Lab was started about 5 years ago. SDN itself was started maybe 10 years ago. Initiative Guru Perelker, Nick McEwen, and Scott Schenker driving a program. Out of that program came the beginnings of SDN and the OpenFlow standard, and along the way they wanted to form an organization that could really benefit everyone by producing tools and platforms in open source. And so they started Open Networking Lab. They asked me to work with them on that. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And we're a 501c3 public benefit corporation, and we have 4 or 5 different open source platforms. The two largest, and the ones which have partnership involved, are ONOS, our controller platform, and then Cord, which is central office re-architected as a data center. And we're funded by 16 corporations. 6 of those are the major operators, such as AT&T, Verizon, SK Telecom, and most recently Google. And then some of the major vendors that are working with these operators. And our model is that we have a core engineering team which is responsible for the integrity of the open source software base. And so we build these software bases, but we can't do it alone. And so we bring in both operator and vendor engineers around that core, and then we have a larger community. So we not only develop software, but we also build communities, and ONOS and Cord have been growing like wildfire, actually. So that's a little bit about ONLAB.
Thank you. And so, Ben, I thought I'd start off with hello. Shall I emote? Okay, don't emote. So PMTS, Principal Member of Technical Staff. It's one of those favorite Bell Lab era titles that seems to have held over. So
that's right.
You joined AT&T a few years ago.
That's right.
To start with that, and then your work there, and then working with Bill at ON.LAB.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, John. So I joined AT&T about 3.5 years ago, and so just in the middle of the transformation of AT&T itself. And the reason I joined AT&T is this interesting work in terms of the open source area. And AT&T at that time had a strategy to transforming its network, right, and to virtualize the network to the, we call it the Man 2 program. And the goal, as John Donovan announced many times, so our goal is to have the 75% of the network to be virtualized by 2020. And so we have our own Vision 2020 program and Workforce 2020 program, and also we are recruiting all the different type of talents that can help AT&T to transform from the traditional telco company to a brand new IT company, right? And to provide our customers with brand new services and on the market. And so I am very honored to join the AT&T in the middle of the transformation and focus on the open source strategy. And so in the AT&T, and one of the programs is called ECOMP, the Enhanced Compute Orchestration Management and Policy, and which basically, and I think it's John Donovan also announced the white paper in March this year. And so white paper is also publicly available and in our website. And so the ECOMP and composed of 2 major components, right? And one is the infrastructure side, and we call it AT&T Integrated Cloud. And on top of that, and that's the orchestration and management functions. And so all those different components, and we are targeting to use the open source. And so our open source strategy includes the consume, contribute, and lead. So basically, we consume the open source and targeted to use, for example, the maybe more than half of the components needs to be open source based solutions. And we also need to contribute, which basically means that we are looking at the different use cases in business and contribute those business requirements to the open source community and get all the different technologies to contribute to the solutions to solve our problems and to help our business transformation. And also the lead.
Can I interject for a second?
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, you've hit on something interesting that I want to make sure is kind of absorbed. You've sort of mentioned in reference, but not delved into domain 2.0 that much. And I'm not sure if everyone in the audience is familiar with that, but maybe a little bit about that. But also what it means to virtualize 75% of your network. Like, how do you quantify that? Is that traffic? Is that nodes? Is that?
That's part, I think it's, we have our operation team. And so one of the operation virtualization methods, for example, is like if we're using the OpenStack, right, to manage all the different virtualized resources, including the compute nodes, storage node, and also the underlying the network, virtualized networks, right? And so there are different type of metrics to measure it, right? And as you mentioned, then we can certainly discuss more in terms of from an operation perspective. And so there is the, it's a kind of ongoing process and to move towards the 75% goal, right? And on the other hand, so as you mentioned, the main two components, and basically we have two major components, eComp and the AIC. And the AIC itself is more maybe easily to be understandable because it's basically that's infrastructure part, and including the computer storage networking. And from open source perspective, and we classify it as a virtualized infrastructure manager, which basically that's OpenStack. Okay, so VIM, virtualized infrastructure, is a terminology from ETC architecture perspective, but the real world implementation right now is the OpenStack, because OpenStack manages the virtual, compute, the storage, and the virtual networking through the Nova, through Neutron, and through other different components in the OpenStack side. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to back up to a high level, which is the notion of open source in telecom itself. So open source is fairly well established, I would say, particularly for this audience, the notion that you have more of a community looking at the same piece of software, it's more robust, you have less lock-in, more interoperability, all sorts of good things, and that's well established. The milestone I think about, and we talked about in our prep call, is Scott McNeely from Sun coming out in his penguin suit back when Linux was really sort of becoming a thing as opposed to a niche. But I want to go from that to kind of Bill, your background, having been at Bell Labs, Nortel, IBM, and now here. What sort of angst do you hear from equipment makers or from telcos about this?
Yeah, it's a hard. It's certainly a challenging transition for actually all the companies in networking, because it hasn't been open source hasn't been a big part of product development and deployment there. And I often say that I contributed to the problem that we're trying to solve, and that I spent 5 years working on the CRS at Cisco, a great example of a very expensive vertically integrated router, right? And now we're pulling it all apart, disaggregating it, and putting a lot of pieces in open source. But the challenge is on the operator side, how do they best consume open source? And we've had some fun interactions with AT&T, because AT&T sometimes wants to treat ON.LAB as a vendor. It's like, okay, well, when are you going to have features here and here? And I have to remind them, it's like, no. We're working together on creating those features. On the vendor side, of course, they feel like we're destroying their revenue streams, and the challenge there is helping them find new business models, because the software that we're creating is not the differentiating software, quite honestly, right? There's a lot in the network that is non-differentiating, and the goal here is to get everybody to contribute to open source and build out this infrastructure software so that everybody can benefit from that, and then get to another level of agility in the network and throughput and new types of services that we can't even imagine today, by getting away from being so focused on this infrastructure and moving to a level of services, right, where you get the real value with customers.
Sure. Okay. So some angst and some requests to treat something as special or unique that should rather stay as part of a central code base is sort of what I'm hearing. You know, having said that, so there are well-established, I guess, case studies of open source integrators coming out of each shift to open source. If you think about the LAMP stack, for example. So you had Red Hat is to Linux and then IBM coming in. Do you see that starting to happen in telecom, or are we a bit too early? I know, Ben, you had given a couple examples during our prep call of vendors. I shouldn't use the term vendor, contributors. Who are coming in as integrators of the new code.
That's right. And so sometimes we call it upstream contributors, right? And so, for example, we have an open source community called OPNV, Open Platform for Network Virtualization, Network Function Virtualization. And so basically it's an open source community, but it's focused on all the integration work and from all the different contributing other open source communities. And in our terminology, we call it upstream communities, and including the honors, right? And honors community, and from the ONLAB, Open Daylight, and Open Contrail, OpenStack, and so put them all together, and to have the integrated platform, which basically targeted for the carrier grade, the quality and the capability, and in order to at least to have for the operators, telcos, to have a choice of open source based platform, and to launch the new services, and also the different kind of the management and orchestration functions on top of it. And in AT&T terminology, the e-com is part of the management and orchestration functions, and on top of that. Yeah. So that's kind of integration stories we have.
Okay.
Can I add?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So it's a really important point, because as these pieces get disaggregated and there's more pieces in the ecosystem, somebody needs to put those pieces together and provide the support package around that for the operators. And from an ONUS perspective, we have both Huawei as well as Ciena that have stepped up to provide commercial versions of the open source code base, and then wrap other services around that. And on the Chord side, Radisys and Ciena are the two integrators. And there's other companies that are starting to talk about doing the same thing, providing commercial solutions for operators. But it's a great new business opportunities for companies that see excuse me, services and integration and new applications as an opportunity to work with the operators.
Thank you. I wanted to get into one use case, and you said there's dedicated a working group for essentially redesigning the central office, and you know that's a big subject. It's global. How many central offices are there in the U.S., just AT&T alone? How many thousand are we talking about? It's just 5,000, 10,000?
4,800.
4,800, okay. Well, I wasn't too far off. So, and then you can assume multiple central offices per MSA, for example. Say San Francisco might have 5, 6, 10, somewhere around there. So the notion of turning that into a data center is very interesting. But if you could speak to kind of equipment hurdles, but also maybe labor hurdles that come with that. Ben, I'll start with you. This nice soft question.
That's a tough question, and but I like this question. So, for this type of transformation, right, and all the technologies are involved, and from the traditional central office and to convert it to the data center, right, lots of things needs to be considered. For example, how do we provide the customers, and with the customer side, the premises, the equipment, and all the type of the virtual CPE type of the requirements needs to be met, and how to, for example, solve the capacity, the problems, transforming all the different type of the optical networking connection problems, and that needs to be well planned, and to have the we call it the revolutionary type of technologies. And I'm glad that the ONLAB and ONUS is working and closely with AT&T and in transforming this from the traditional the central office and into different type of data center, and also work with like the solutions include the XOS plus and ONUS with OpenStack, and so that it can have all the different type of control applications and the VNF applications, and to be able to part of the virtualization effort and in this type of transformation.
Are there MSAs where this is being tested today, for example? So you're in Mountain View, I believe, so, or was it Menlo Park?
Menlo Park.
So the Bay Area, is this live in some way, or do you have a test bed for this?
You can go ahead, yeah.
So there isn't a live one in the San Francisco area. They did the trial really closer to home. We started interacting with AT&T through the Foundry, right, which is their innovation arm.
Sure.
And so they started with it. Then we've moved it into the operational groups, and so now we're engaged with them. And so they have a very methodical process for moving it through stages in AT&T until it can move out into the network.
Well, it's interesting. So you think about typical data center topologies. You might have West Coast, East Coast, somewhere in the Midwest, and you can cover the entire U.S. that way. Maybe it's Austin, maybe it's a Dakota. But if you have 5 or 10 per city, I would imagine there are a lot of latency benefits that a customer could get from this. And so if you could speak to that or some of the use cases you envision from this.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think mobile cord is one of the most interesting cases, and especially as you work on the 5G needs for IoT, for example, where you have to handle connectionless, very short connections. So that's one use case. Another is being able to provide your own local content, so quickly putting up a cell at a stadium or an event and being able to push content there locally and not have it go all the way back to the core of the network and then back out. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for latency. Healthcare is another one that's being explored. Sure. So.
Yeah, and also it could be that we have a central office, right, in the central city, and also close to the different neighborhood, and in the last mile, and we may have the 5G type of network, and to bridge the gaps, and from the kind of the central office, and to each customer, the residential areas, and in fact, Randall Stephenson, our CEO, right, and talk about this 5G tech, the kind of the strategy and the vision, and I think a few days ago. In one of the videos. Yeah.
Just to be clear, this enables 5G, but isn't necessarily pegged to 5G. I think that's, well, they're separate.
Separate,
but,
yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. But could you say this is a way to sort of Akamai's your network or use it to support more Akamai-ish applications?
That could be one of the way and the vision to support it, yeah.
Is Akamai a member of the ON.LAB?
Akamai has been a vendor that has brought VNFs into the demonstrations that we've done at ONS so that you could provide a caching service. So as we have some of the vendors create VNFs and move them into Cord, we wanted to be able to show that it's very easy for somebody who's maybe not part of the partnership, right, to just come in, provide the VNF, and show value in a demonstration like that.
So we're coming on 2 minutes, and I haven't called on anyone yet, so I'm feeling a little remiss. If there are any questions for our esteemed panelists while they're up here, please raise your hand. We have a gentleman who can pass around a microphone. Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions. So, you. Anyway, okay. So very good. And so, as far as commercialization, then you're saying 75% by 2020.
Yes.
What does that mean in terms of, if I'm an end customer, how will I be experiencing it? Is that enterprise, is that consumers, is it mobile, is it?
The goal is that from the end user perspective, and we are committed to improved user experience. So from user perspective, right, and you shouldn't notice any changes from the infrastructure side and the technology side. But all you should experience is that you have faster video, for example, right, and lower latency and better quality of service. And in terms of if you're enterprise customers, right, you'll be able to support your own employees in the different geographical locations around the world. And because, for example, AT&T, we have our own operations in the Mexico and also we have direct TV in the some other countries in Latin America, for example. and through those acquisitions. So all from user perspective, and we're expecting those improved user experience and improved the enhanced quality of service.
Excellent, thank you. And then Bill, any sort of commercial milestones or upcoming milestones you want to trumpet while we're here?
There's a number of different field trials and deployments that are coming up. There's a use case that we haven't mentioned, for example, for IP optical. So there's a lot of interest in how we manage the IP and optical network together to optimize that. And so there's some deployments that are well, first field trials and then deployments coming in that area. And I mentioned mobile cord, but eCord is an interesting example of how you knit together you mentioned there's multiple central offices in a metro area, and eCord is the solution for doing that. And as part of eCord, an interesting disaggregation project is disaggregating the ROADM. And so we've been working with AT&T on some of that. So those are some examples.
All right, so we're on time. I'm letting this silence pass for now, and I'll attribute it to lack of coffee. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bill.
Onward.